So welcome back to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast with me, Lisa Burrell. And today I'm joined by Jack Mannings, who back in 2015 sustained a spinal cord injury and is now the Spinal Injuries Association support coordinator for London. Oh, I made a bit of a mouthful of that. Sorry, Jack.
Well, yeah, it is a bit of a mouthful at times. I sometimes stumble over that one myself, and it's my own bloody title. So,
Well, it's really good to have you on the podcast, Jack. So thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us. It really is quite special. I think as healthcare professionals, there's been quite a lot of academic study really recently around spinal cord injuries, but we are very much the amateurs, and it's nice to have an expert today to come and talk to us about what it's really like.
It's nice to be called an expert. That's something that's new for me. So,
well, we'll try and keep the niceties going all the way through. Do you mind if we start with a little bit about you? Do you mind telling us a bit about you, where you work, and the work that you're doing at the moment with SIA, just to get us started?
yeah, sure. So, as you very expertly put it earlier on, I'm the support coordinator for Spinal Injuries Association, specifically kind of in the London area. Obviously, it's a national charity, so we've got kind of other Jacks, if you like, across the country, but London's my patch. And I suppose my role in running that support network is to try and get as many people with spinal cord injuries back to living a fun, fulfilling, incredible life, because unfortunately that there are a lot of barriers that are put in their way, and we're fortunate enough that we've been able to break through some of those barriers, but not everyone is, and so we want our expert voice, our guiding voice perhaps, to be able to support as many people to get back to whatever meaningful activities are important to them. Because I think if there's one thing that I've learned since my injury is that there are 9 times out of 10 much smarter people than me that have worked out incredible ways of doing almost anything. And sometimes you just need that support and that guiding voice to point you in the right direction.
It's amazing. It sounds like you've had the opportunity to support quite a lot of people, and been quite an inspiration to many people, actually. So we're really lucky to have you come and talk to us. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about the I word, but yeah, no, I think sometimes it's more a case of, I've made all the mistakes already, so I can tell you what not to do. But, certainly that it is a really great part of my job is that I meet so many different people from so many different kind of backgrounds and so many different interests. So every day's sort of very different for me, which is, how I like it.
Every day's a learning day for sure. Do you mind telling us, Jack, about what happened back in 2015 when you had your injury and how this all started for you?
Yep, sure. So, well, I was about to say 8 years ago, but it's coming up on 9 this summer. I was involved in a car crash. Really boring story, to be honest with you, but I was in a car with my sister who was driving at the time, going down a country road that we'd both driven down hundreds of times. No one had been speeding. It was the middle of the daytime, just one of those freak accidents, and sadly she lost control of the car, ended up in a tree, and I sort of was made tetraplegic, so from sort of C5 level, and sadly my sister, who was also in the car obviously as the driver, passed away in the accident. And yeah, that would have been August 2015. So it's one of those things where it seems a million years ago, but also seems just like yesterday. But no, I think it's certainly, as you said, every day's a learning day, and it's certainly been that way for me in the last, nearly a decade.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's certainly not a boring story. It's quite an incredible thing, what you went through. It is quite.
I think that's one of the big things about us with spinal cord injuries, though, is we do have that kind of dark sense of humor. My favorite story ever. We're always sort of competing with our stories. You see, my favorite story ever is a guy that I knew quite well who worked at Longleat, the safari park zoo type situation in I want to say Somerset, maybe Dorset, that direction anyway. And he was injured because he was sat on by a rhino.
Oh, wow.
Now, if we're comparing stories, that's a pretty good one. Supposedly he was out feeding them because that was just part of his job. And a bit like how cats and dogs like to rub up against your legs. So do rhinos, apparently, except this rhino didn't realize that he wasn't one and couldn't take the weight of it. And, sadly fell on him. And
My
he was there
goodness.
for quite some time before he was found, which is, crazy story. But again, pretty good one. Hard to beat that.
That is an amazing story. I cannot imagine what it must have been like as the team who went out to treat him to
Mm,
get that call come in, patient crushed by rhino. My goodness, that raises the bar in the UK for sure. I think, to be honest, this whole area of spinal cord injury is such a challenge for us as pre-hospital clinicians because honestly, I mean, I've been doing pre-hospital critical care for 17 years, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of complete cord transections that I've seen in that time. It's actually really rare, and we really do worry about whether we're going to be able to look after patients properly, holistically in that moment when you have such a life-changing injury. I mean, it's actually
mm,
relatively more common to see the partial cord syndromes where people still have some level of function, but to have a complete loss of function is extremely difficult situation. And you've certainly had, probably as much of an extreme experience of that anybody could possibly have. And I'm sorry to take you back to that time, but thank you for sharing with us what happened to you. Do you remember in those early hours anything particularly that was really good that the team did for you, or things that they did maybe that didn't help you or made things more difficult? Can you remember anything about the actual experience in those first few hours? I'm thinking particularly for the pre-hospital clinicians
mm,
listening to this
mm.
podcast, if there's anything that they could take away from that.
I think initially there was supposed to be a helicopter come pick us up that couldn't find anywhere to land nearby.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an issue and kind of caused a little bit of a delay, I guess.
Mm.
I think that early sort of period of just being in the car, especially obviously with my sister there, was pretty traumatic. And so that kind of period got extended maybe longer than it otherwise could have done. But weirdly, the abiding memory I have outside of obviously sadly my sister, but from myself was just I was furious that they were cutting my favorite pair of shoes off me. I was like, this seems so unnecessary. I've just broken my wrist. So don't, it was so much in denial about what had happened that, um, I just remember then cutting my shoes off and being absolutely furious about it, which is, pretty comical looking back on it. And the other thing is that when the ambulance finally arrived, it was actually a school friend of mine. It was his dad was one of the paramedics there,
Oh, wow.
and he recognised me and was sort of asking me sort of different questions about things, and it was that was quite an interesting one. I had to say, soon after that, it was quite an extensive laundry list of extracurriculars that I was probably on at the time. Lots of different drugs going in my system. So I think beyond that, I don't really remember a lot from the first few weeks. Really, the only other thing I remember from kind of very early on, which is once I'd arrived in hospital, was so I managed to split my head open in the car crash, and I remember then getting sort of I don't know whether it was a student, but somebody that was perhaps new to that sort of thing to sew me back up, which was an interesting one. I've definitely got the scar to show it, but I
Wow.
suppose everyone's got to learn somewhere, don't they?
So they didn't do a great job with your.
A much better job than I would have done. Let's put it that way. But I've seen neater scars in my life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it, that when we're with somebody who's having that life-changing injury, maybe that it just is not the time for somebody to be learning their suturing skills. But what an impact. Um,
Perhaps, I think I always lean towards being a bit more sympathetic in those sort of situations, I suppose, just because, I think you've got to learn in those sort of situations sometimes, don't you?
Yeah. And you thought you'd broken your wrists, you said. Is that right? At the
Yeah,
time?
yeah, yeah. So I should probably, touch on that is that for a long time, I because of my level of spinal cord injury, I don't have any use of my hands anymore, and very limited sort of use of my wrists. So at the time in the car and in the first maybe few days or week or so at hospital, I was just convinced that I'd broken my wrists, which is why I couldn't move my hands. I just remember thinking, I was sort of maybe 4 weeks off going back to university. And I remember just thinking, oh, for God's sake, I'm going to go back to university with two broken wrists. This is not great, is it? And, it took a few times of people sort of sitting me down and saying, well, not sitting me down, I was already lying down, but uh, having to kind of describe what had happened and that it was maybe a little bit more serious than that. The only problem with that being that, I was on so many drugs that I kept forgetting. So, the poor, nurses and physios probably had to tell me about 10 times before I probably sank in.
It's interesting that you talk about that, actually, Jack, because I think that is the thing that we really, really worry about. And actually, maybe worry about it too much. I think that there's this process where people put off being the one to tell somebody that they've actually got an injury that is
Mm.
going to change their life. And nobody really wants to be the one to deliver that information and get it wrong. So sometimes it gets put off and put off until somebody is confident that they can deliver it and get it right. Do you remember your experience of having that information given to you? I know you said you were on a bit of ketamine at the time, so it
Yeah,
was
yeah, among
a bit
other
hazy.
things, to be fair. But ketamine drip is a powerful thing. But no, I think I was almost told it, at least in my memory, which is probably somewhat warped, but in my memory, I was told it almost gradually. So it was, initially you're probably not going to walk again. Then it was, you might struggle to kind of use your hands again, and then it sort of developed from there to all the other things that were affected. I think, I was also struggling in intensive care, but I had like double pneumonia.
Wow.
Um, and I was in Southampton General, which is, I believe, or it certainly was at the time, one of the only major trauma centres that didn't sort of automatically intubate. Um, so, that a big process for me in those early days was sort of getting back those oxygen levels and that side of things. So I was almost focused on that more than I was focused on kind of what the knock-on effects of the spinal injury would
Mm,
be. Um, I was certainly in denial for a long time as well. I think, that's probably something that a lot of people share. Um, I was saying, things might come along that, magically solve everything, or, oh, no, I just need to have special gloves or something, was a weird one that I was, using for a while. And yeah, being told for me was almost drip fed.
mm,
And it's hard to say whether that was the right way or the wrong way.
mm,
Um, but yeah, certainly, the difficulty was probably that I didn't remember that much.
mm,
Yeah, my sister, I was very fortunate. I had sort of great family and friends around me at the time, and had lots of great sort of presents and things come in, and signed rugby shirts and that sort of thing. And my sister would just give them to me kind of every couple of hours as though they were brand new, and I was just as excited about them as the first time she gave them to me. I was like, "What do you mean?
mm.
Really? Oh my God!" Yeah, over and over again. She was probably enjoying herself a little bit too much at the time, to be honest with you. But yeah, no, it was about being told kind of about the level of injury. I think it was almost, a couple of months before it really sank in kind of to like the full extent of what everything would mean.
Mm.
And I think that maybe just being a bit more certain at the time would have been quite helpful, and would have allowed me to kind of understand what my goals should be a little bit better. Certainly from my job at SIA, I see a lot of people that don't necessarily have full understanding of what their injury is and what the consequences might be. And I think that can actually sometimes hurt their rehab or their kind of rehab goals in a way, because they're so concentrated on, learning how to walk again, that they're actually missing out on all the other amazing things that they could be focusing on. So I think that in a lot of ways is, affects probably people that I support a lot more than it maybe affected me at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And that maybe that really early phase where you're concentrating just on breathing almost. Maybe in that
Yeah.
really early phase, you're just living moment by moment a bit more. I don't know. Do you think it would have been helpful to have had that concrete information early, or do you have been able to process it at that time?
I think purely because, as you say, I was focusing on so many other things, maybe uh, in a way, it, I probably wasn't ready for it, but are you ever ready to hear that? Um, and actually, I think maybe the earlier that you realize that, the earlier you can sort of focus on, and maybe that's a bit cold-hearted of me, I don't know, but the earlier you kind of know the full extent of your injury is the moment you can start focusing on the right pathway back to doing all the, fun things that you can do. At the time, I was convinced that 9 out of my 10 favorite things to do, I'd never be able to do them anymore. I'd never be able to, play rugby or play music or any of these other things. Actually, since my injury, I've been able to prove that almost all of those things I've been able to do. Um, I've been really fortunate in that, and somebody that sticks with me quite a lot was a bloke who had sickle cell. So he kind of already knew that he might die young and had this bucket list of 20 things that he wanted to do. And he was very low at the time. He didn't know the full extent of his injury or what, how extreme or how not extreme it might be. But in his head, he wasn't going to be able to do any of these things on his list. So what was the point in carrying on? Just wanted to end everything, which is obviously not something that's people would take on lightly. And I remember just sitting with him for maybe 2.5 hours. We just went one by one through the list of things that were on his, his bucket list. And by the end of it, I think we managed to do 19 out of the 20 things. And in the months since then, he's gone on and actually done, I think, already about 10 of them. But you don't know how to go about attacking those things on the list unless you know what your limitations are going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. There's such a message in that for so many people. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jack. What about in that time when the information is not certain, where we don't have, scan results or
Yeah.
exactly know, would it be helpful for you to have that information when it's not certain? Would it be helpful just to be in the loop of what people are thinking, worrying about?
I think that, probably the most irritating answer I could give for that is probably the one that I'm going to give, but that's almost sort of on a case by case basis.
Mm.
I think one of the things that, I think probably those sorts of decision makers in hospital and myself have in common is that you almost have to read the patient and the patient's family and work out, actually, is this going to be best for them? Is it not going to be best for them? And so, that is a frustrating answer, and probably a bit of a non-answer in some ways, but I think you've really got to be able to read the situation. And sometimes people want all the information right now and be completely up to date, know what some of the different permutations might be, but just be aware of what they all are. And some people, they're not quite ready for that yet, and actually would benefit from not having that uncertainty there and actually having concrete answers there. And so probably in those sort of situations, you might want to wait a little bit before you then deliver, that information.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing that you have a real clear theme that keeps coming through about the importance of family, and we talk a lot about how family are amazing heroes within this whole process, and bringing the family with you on this journey is just so important. So,
well, something we always say at SIAs, spinal cord injury doesn't happen to kind of an individual; it happens to a whole group of people. And whether that's family, whether that's friends. I mentioned earlier, I was extremely fortunate that I had an incredibly strong group of family and friends that kind of really pulled me through all of the really tough times. But a lot of people don't necessarily have that. And I think sometimes those are the people that slip through the cracks somewhat. And so, hopefully, the healthcare professionals and in sort of in league with SIA and other similar charities, we can really kind of be that network in a way for them.
Yeah, that really brings that home. Yeah. And on a sort of personal level, do you have any coping strategies that you've resorted to, or things that you share with people to get them through when it is tough?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I really suffered with kind of early on, and to an extent still do, is just physical pain, so nerve pain, neuropathic pain. And one piece of advice that a physio once gave me that I tell anybody that will listen is that neuropathic pain is a bit like having a radio on in the background. Like if it's there and you're listening to it, it's always there and you can hear it clear as day, and that's all you're concentrating on. If you're not concentrating on it, it's still there. It's still playing just as loudly. But if you're reading or watching something or writing or whatever else it might be, if you're focused on something else, it's still playing just as loudly, but you're not focusing on it as much. And I think certainly from a physical pain aspect, that has been something that's been incredibly useful for me. Kind of, as I said, nearly a decade now. I still kind of use that. So that's certainly something from a physical pain point of view. More from that sort of mental pain, I think to an extent that still works. I think some of the darkest times for people early on in hospitals, they're stuck in bed in the middle of the night. They've not got out of bed in, a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months even. Those long nights, really trying hard not to focus on one of the worst case scenarios. It can be pretty tricky. And so I think in a lot of those situations, it's really good to have as much information about things to look forward to. So some adventurous things that they're going to be able to do, something that's going to have them actually be looking forward to something rather than, always looking back, is really important, and often just distraction. So whether that's, listening to podcasts, maybe like this one, in the evenings, or whether that's, listening to audiobooks is a big thing for me. I think certainly early on, it's having something positive to focus on, being distracted the rest of the time, and then slowly kind of working from there onwards. But it's certainly not an easy thing, and I think different people respond to different ways of dealing with that. But it's about having things to look forward to, I find. I think that's fairly universal. We all enjoy lots of different things, don't we? But I think everyone needs something to look forward to feel like they're actually still capable of moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And you've got a strong message of hope, I think, there for people through what is obviously going to be very difficult times. But, when I talk to you, you have a C5 injury and you wouldn't know it at all. You're such a vibrant, active person, or that's how you come across.
Well, I mean, part of that's probably growing up with older sisters. If you kind of have to be a bit like that if you want to get a word in edgeways. But yeah, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have
Mm.
sort of darker days or days where I was really not feeling particularly positive or happy, or I was frustrated and angry about things that had happened. I think that's perfectly normal. And I'd almost be more worried about myself, or indeed someone that I'd be supporting, if they didn't have the occasional moment or days like that. I think that's perfectly normal. But I think we really have to, as I hate the whole idea of a disabled community. I think that's growing in popularity at the moment. But for me, I think that you're yourself before you're your disability. Um, but I think it's really important that people are aware of all the opportunities that are out there. So I think it's a lot more, well, it's a lot easier to be upbeat and happy and chatty if you're excited about things that are going to come up. When I was injured, what, 8.5, 9 years ago, I didn't know a single person in a wheelchair by name. So how on earth are you meant to know about how to get back driving, or how to get back into work, or how to what technology is going to help me get back and finish my degree in my case, or there are a million different things out there, a million different questions that you've never had to think about before. So why would you know the answers to them? And I think, a key to staying positive and staying, present and in the moment, and, maybe staying sane in a way. I hate to harp on about it, but it is to have things to look forward to, things to be excited about. And, I think we really have a duty, I guess, to show people that these things are possible. And quite frankly, I'm a bit of a village idiot. So, if I can do it, then almost anyone can do it.
Just to put that in context, what was life like for you before all of this happened?
Well, I suppose, probably very stereotypical 20-year-old bloke, I guess. Big into my kind of water sports. I grew up playing rugby and absolutely loved that. I love playing music and all of those sorts of things. And I just finished my first year of university. I'd just done summer working down in Cornwall, but me and my friends used to go and do each summer. I'd literally just come back to see my sister for a weekend, which is when we went out for the drive, unfortunately. But no, I think as someone that probably had everything going for them in a certain way, but yeah, no, obviously some of those things change and some of them don't. Certainly, as we've already touched upon, having that group of family and friends around me has always been, a huge part of who I am, and how I could have deal with situations, I guess. And fortunately, that's not gone anywhere. And I'd encourage anybody that's had sort of a spinal injury. Unfortunately, it's all too common that there's a level of, God, maybe even embarrassment about being as vulnerable perhaps as they are now, and they end up sort of losing some of those closer connections with friends because they don't want their friends to see them in that state. And I've seen it all too often where people end up losing some of their closest friends because they've been pushing them away a bit. And I really encourage people to just know that your friends are friends with you for who you are, not because your injury. Your friends aren't friends with your legs. And if they are, it's a little bit weird. And actually, they're friends with who you are, and that hasn't changed. And I was always really fortunate to know that was the case. I think one of the earliest kind of memories from me in hospital was one of my best friends came in to see me, came in and sat down on the chair next to me, sort of slumped down, went, well, it would be you, Jack, wouldn't it? You're an absolute idiot. And, from that point onwards, it was always a bit, I knew that we were going to still be mates, and it wasn't that sort of weird treading on eggshells thing, which I think far too many people fall foul of. Um, People are far too worried about saying the right thing or not saying the wrong thing, and actually worrying about saying the wrong thing is the problem in itself. Most people don't care if you say the wrong word or not. They just want you to treat you as though you've always been their friend, which you have, I guess. I don't know. That was probably a bit of a meandering answer on that one, and maybe not particularly sticking to the question, but there you go.
You show the brilliant people who are in your life. And actually, I think it is so common that people are so worried about saying the wrong thing. People end up saying nothing, and then it becomes all very artificial, very odd for the person who's got so much to come to terms with physically to have all of those emotional relationships challenged as well. Just a whole nother level to it, isn't it? And what is life like for you now? I mean, I kind of get the picture of this young 20-year-old before.
Yeah, no, I mean, great if I'm honest. Yeah, I think I've been able to do things in the last sort of few years that I never would have dreamt I would have done even before, my injury. I've been really fortunate that I've been able to travel as much as I have, which has always been important to me. So, I've been skiing in Sweden. I've just come back from a big trip in South Africa. Potentially got a trip to Costa Rica planned. So, things are good for me. I'm doing a job that I love, where, I mean, if it's not obvious already, that I tend to never shut up. So, having a job where 95% of it is talking to people is always a dream for me. So that's pretty great. Yeah, no, I think I'm very happy, and I really want as many people as possible to know that that is possible and doable. And if anyone out there is listening to this that has gone through a similar thing and needs that support, and specifically maybe that support from somebody that's kind of got that lived experience, then I just encourage them to get in touch. And I think it'd be really important for them to know that life doesn't end with a disability. And that's a bit of a cringe statement, but it's true. And actually, so many more doors can open if you know where to look.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. That's so amazingly powerful. Thank you, Jack. We'll just bring it together with any messages that you'd really like to get out, either to people who are living with a spinal cord injury, or any advice that you might have for healthcare professionals like me, or people who are caring for people with spinal cord injury. What do you think are the most important things that you'd like people to know?
So from a healthcare perspective, I think maybe the two most important things that are often overlooked are bladder and bowel care, and then also pressure sores. Those are things that are so easily handled, but are so often overlooked, and can have a huge effect on somebody's recovery, let alone their mental state, but also just their recovery. I mean, a good example of that would be somebody who I supported who went all the way through major trauma, was then in a general ward for a little bit, then he was fortunate enough to go to a spinal unit, which in this day and age is a luxury rather than something that most people would experience. So he'd done really well. He'd done all his physio there. He'd kind of really turned things around. Then he needed to get a stair lift put into his house, just to make it a bit more accessible for him. While that was happening, he was discharged to a general hospital again. They didn't sort out his pressure source properly. They weren't turning him in bed properly. Picked up a pressure sore, and he's been in hospital for the last 6 months. Just with that getting worse and worse and worse, and all that positive progress that he'd made is, a lot of it straight out the window, which is, incredibly frustrating because it is such a simple thing that could have easily been fixed. And bowel care is another one that's, not necessarily handled in the way that I think most people would want to be handled. I think far too many people are not comfortable doing it. Far too many people refuse to do it, which can often, lead to quite a few sort of knock-on health problems for people with spinal cord injury. Not enough wards are, comfortable enough doing it, and even then, the people that do it a lot of the time don't have a lot of confidence around it. And with somebody that's just had a spinal cord injury, it's a life-changing injury. It's already taken away quite a bit from them in their minds. They're now being infantilized. They're having to have fairly basic things taken care of for them, which I think no adult really wants to have happen. And so when when that's not handled well, or handled by somebody that isn't particularly confident about it, that only makes that person feel 10 times worse about it. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more people that are discharged from hospital and never really had a proper bowel routine in place. Again, I hate to sort of talk about long stories and case studies, but I think sometimes it's important to put it into context that one of the first people I supported when I moved into my role at SIA was a lovely guy, really intelligent, spoke about 5 different languages, had been an engineer, and in the last 5 years, he'd left his house 3 times because he was so terrified that if he'd left his house, he might have an accident and embarrass his family or embarrass his kids, or it was awful. He was wearing adult nappies in bed, having his wife have to clear up after him. And these are all things that, if he'd had proper bowel management and training from the start, which really would not have taken that long, that's 5 years of his life that he's now lost. And so fortunately, myself and a member of our specialist nursing team at SIA were able to go in and sort of point him in the right direction and teach him a couple of things over a few sessions. And he's completely changed his life around just on that one thing. He's out doing triathlons with his kids now and doing amazing things. And all of that came down to the people in hospital at the time refused or didn't know how to do bowel care properly, which is, crazy. On the flip side of that, if we're talking about pieces of advice that I'd give to people that have had a spinal cord injury, it's become the expert on your injury. No one else is going to do it for you. You have to be the expert, so that when you go to a hospital setting after you've been injured, you may have to go back to hospital at various different times for various different reasons, even to see a GP. You need to be the expert on your injury because no one else is going to do that for you. And unfortunately, as you touched on earlier, spinal cord injuries are quite rare in the grand scheme of things. So a lot of these healthcare professionals have never really had to deal with somebody with a spinal cord injury. So it's really important that you know as much as you can about your own injury so that you can then instruct others on the best way of looking after you. So that would probably be my advice for both sides of the aisle there.
That's amazing advice, Jack. That's really, really good advice. Thank you. And just because the majority of people listening to this will be those who are the first attenders on scene with patients, is there anything that you'd like to say to those people that they can do or not do to improve things for patients in the future?
Yeah, don't cut my shoes off. They're nice shoes. Yeah.
Great
No,
advice.
no. It's a very good question. I think in general, those first responders are probably some of, if not the best people in the whole, you know, line of healthcare professionals that someone with a spinal injury sees, but they are also the first person that they will see. And so I think sometimes maybe having a little bit more knowledge about some of those early things can only be helpful. Obviously, I think it's fairly common knowledge now that if there's potential of spinal cord injury, you don't want to move that person as very, very much. But there are other things as well. Just thinking that a lot of these are from traumatic cases, certainly the ones that I imagine the air ambulance would be kind of mostly involved with. And that actually just to know that, I don't know, one of the things that stuck with me from my injury is just the members of the ambulance kind of talking about my sister, and obviously how she had died quite soon after the car crash, but just the way that maybe they were talking about her when I was and maybe have a bit more of a understanding that that's almost just as difficult an element of it as the physical side of things in that moment anyway.
Sure. And I wonder whether it's easy sometimes to switch off if you find it difficult to talk to somebody. I wonder if sometimes people switch off from talking to that person, and so they're talking around you but not really talking to you, and that maybe can be a feature of things that we can do better.
Yeah, I think you probably put that much better than I have, but that's exactly right. Yeah.
Listen, Jack, it's been absolutely amazing to talk to you. Honestly, such a privilege, and such a privilege to hear about all the great work that you and SIA are doing. Thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, no worries at all. And just one final plug is that if anybody that's listening, comes across somebody with a spinal cord injury, please do get in touch with us. We can't do any of the work that we do unless we are referred patients. So we can be there from day one, even if it's to support the families at that stage. We just want to be there to help as many people as possible. So if you do come across any spinal cord injury patients, then please do get in touch and get us involved.
Thank you, Jack. And we can post the links for that under our show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you to everyone for listening, and we'll catch up again soon. Thanks, Jack.
Very much.